Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this morning's meeting of the Audit Committee. This is the second meeting of the Audit Committee in the month of June, and I'm delighted to see everyone again. Can I start first of all by extending a warm welcome to Michael Wilkie and Christopher Windiat from KPMG, our external auditors, to the meeting. Gentlemen, you're very welcome, and obviously you may stay as long as you wish, and we'd be delighted to have you, but equally if you need to move on after your items have been considered, then that's also perfectly fine, but welcome. I would also add at the start that I've just been contacted by Councillor McDade, who has advised me that he's having connection problems, but he will join us as soon as possible. But he's said it's perfectly in order for us to start without him, which we shall now do. Okay, can I start with are there any apologies, please?
Yes, Convener. We have an apology from Councillor Harry Coates with Councillor Forbes substituting, and we also have an apology from Councillor McCall. Okay,
thank you for that. Now, can we just make sure that we've got everybody on, and if you can do a roll call, as my dog barks inconveniently. And if you can start the roll call just now, that would be great. Thanks.
Yeah. Good morning, members. When I call out your name, if you could please confirm that you're present. Convener, we've already heard from yourself. Councillor Liz Barrett.
Present.
Councillor Donaldson.
Present.
Councillor Forbes.
Present.
Councillor Illingworth.
Present.
And I don't think we quite have Councillor McDade yet, but we are just trying to get him in. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Kirsten. Right, okay, we shall move on to the agenda and item number 2, which is declarations of interest. If there are any declarations of interest, please can you type DI in the chat. I'll leave it a few seconds to see if anyone does.
Councillor Stewart has his hand up, Convener.
Yeah.
Sorry, Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you very much, Councillor Forbes. My chat function seems to be muted because I did type in something. Can I, and that hopefully it's not going to create a problem later. Declaration of interest in respect of Horsecross, which is in the accounts is stated as a subsidiary council.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Donaldson. And if you or anyone else has difficulty with the chat function, if you wish to contribute at any point in time, please just put your camera on and wave, and I'll hopefully see you. So thank you for that. Okay, so moving on therefore to item 3 on the agenda, which is the minute of the meeting of the Audit Committee of 21st June, 9 days ago. For those who were present at that meeting, are there any items of contention at all within that draft minute? Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Convener. And I see Lisa is actually not in the meeting just now. Can I just say on the minutes, because it's a follow-up to the 21st, and it's quite important because today is the deadline day for the EU settlement scheme. I did ask some questions. You'll see in the minutes, Lisa, I think it will be, got back, and it's very reasonably substantive. What I would like to ask on it, it refers to the work that's been put in, and I'm very grateful the work put in by PCAVs, the Ethnic Minorities Law Centre, Perth Citizens Advice Bureau. But it is to ask the second part of that response It has been confirmed, however, that late submissions can be submitted after today, where there are reasonable grounds to do so. Could I just ask if people are in care homes, or if they're digitally excluded because they can access the registrar's service, would that constitute reasonable grounds? And the second point is the timescale. Do we have any indications of just how long the late applications will indeed be accepted?
Lisa, you've arrived back just in time.
Just in time. What I can give assurance is that obviously when we were looking to support those who were requiring help with EU settlement status and applying for the appropriate registration, we did do a review of our residents within care homes, and as far as we know, we have dealt with all of these, not significant numbers, but the numbers that we have identified, we have supported, and they've been supported to make their appropriate applications. So we're not aware of there being a problem within care homes with residents that we are aware of. But PCAVs, we have done it. We do have regular contact with all the care home providers, and so therefore they know the services there. In terms of whether that would constitute a material reason, as a lawyer, I would make a good argument that it does. And I don't think there's a deliberate barrier around here. I think we also have to recognise that we have been operating in the middle of a global pandemic, so I'm sure there would be latitude extended there. I would be very surprised if it wasn't. But as far as we know, we don't have a significant issue with that. But again, I would caveat that with that as regards the residents that we actually know about. In terms of a deadline, we don't have a definitive deadline as yet. So if we do have any further clarification around that, obviously there will be appropriate communications and publicity around that, and we're happy to report back. We also don't have any definitive numbers for you, Councillor, and that is just because of the fluidity and the nature of the population that we're dealing with, some being obviously transient. So we don't actually have statistics, and I don't think there are formal UK statistics either. But as and when we get any more detail around that, I'm sure David McPhee would be quite happy to come back and give you a bit of an update around that, as I can understand why it's a concern and something that elected members would be interested in terms of their own community.
Can I just thank you, Lisa, for that, and we would appreciate, and I'm sure other members of this committee, an update, understand the position on figures. I still think there's a bit of uncertainty, but I do welcome the work that's been put in on this, in particular with through other agencies like PCAVs, CAB, and that certainly is helpful. But
more than happy, Councillor Donaldson, to perhaps get David to do a little bit of a summary report for a future meeting of Audit.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
That's very helpful. Thank you, Lisa, and thanks, Councillor Donaldson, for your question. So if there are no other issues in relation to the minute of the meeting of Audit Committee of 21st June, can I take these as approved?
Approved.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, so now moving on, and I'm going to pass over to the Vice Convener, Councillor Donaldson, to take the next item on the agenda. Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Convener. We now move on item 4 to the Interim Management Report and Audit Status Summary from KPMG. I stress it is the Interim Report. I'm also going to be taking further on the part on the unaudited draft annual accounts, but in between we've got the Strategic Risk Register and the Internal Audit Plan, And I think what I'd stress is all these 4 items really all link in together. But first of all, from KPMG, I believe we have here, I'm going to ask, it'll be either Michael Wilkie or Chris Windiat to speak to the paper, and we will note it at the end. And then I'll ask council officers to respond, and then we'll throw it open to questions and comments. So I'm not sure whether it's going to be Michael or Chris that's going to speak to the paper. Are you here?
Yes, I'm here, Councillor. Thank you. I'll take it, and I'll be supported by Chris, I'm sure, with any of the trickier questions. So just as background, as you say, this is our interim report, so largely follows the conclusion of our controls testing at the council rather than the audit of the financial statements. And it sets out that we have not changed at this point in time any of our identified risks or focus areas, which remain consistent with the audit strategy, and acknowledges, importantly, the context in which this report is presented. So it gives an update on the results of our controls testing. But what I think is important to note, and this is very consistent across our client base as auditor, is that actually the pandemic was affecting organisations at this time last year as we went into the year-end audit and as we did our interim controls testing. But I think it's fair to say that the impact on organisations across the board has been more significant this year in terms of officer time, abilities to dedicate time to audit and to continue with the control environment that is ordinary. So actually the impact was only just starting to be felt at this point in time last year, whereas it has had time to have a lasting impact by this point this year, and that is something we've seen across the board. That said, so from page 5 of our document, or 9 in the pack onwards, sets out the results of the controls testing. And as you'll see, across a broad range of controls, the very significant majority we've noted as satisfactory. There are a few in there which are TBC, a couple where we haven't been able to complete all of the testing in our sample size, and a couple because we don't undertake that testing until year end as part of our planned approach. The 2 things I would highlight are probably just the 2 controls where we have a recommendation. So the first one is in respect to bank reconciliations, where we note that one was completed later than we would normally expect, so not within a month of the end of the period. We do note that it was ultimately completed and therefore still meets the control objective and satisfies our requirements as auditors. And we also recognise management's response, which notes that the team responsible for completing the bank reconciliations were involved in processing a number of the newer additional COVID support payments. And later in the report, we have a second recommendation, which is around management's review of pension assumptions. Because the pension liability we consider to be a significant risk, and that's a specific definition within audit standards, we're required to identify and test the design and implementation of management's controls around that risk. It's a risk which often we find we have a recommendation. In fact, I'm making this recommendation across a range of my audited bodies. And whilst we recognise and compliment management for the control which was implemented last year around their review of assumptions, and recognise that that does enhance the council's control environment, we also consider that it doesn't meet the very high bar which we would require as auditors in order for us to be able to rely on the control. Because it is a high bar, it hasn't affected our testing because we did not plan to rely on the control. It doesn't change our approach, but I do have to report it here because it's related to the significant risk. And in order for us to be able to rely on that control, we consider that management would have to effectively employ the services of another qualified actuary to be able to provide the level of expertise that we think would be needed to independently challenge the council's actuaries, or so the actuaries of the pension fund, around the assumptions. So really, just to summarise there, do recognise that the control adds value. It does strengthen the control environment, but doesn't meet the bar that we would need to be able to rely on it as auditors. We haven't planned to rely on it, and therefore it hasn't impacted on our audit approach, but I am required to report it to you in any case. There's probably not much merit in me saying much more on the report. The rest of the results of our testing, as I said, are satisfactory and commendable, really, in the context of the environment within which the Council's been operating. And we have had regard to paying attention to whether any controls had weakened or been carried out differently as a result of people working from home, for example. As I say, our findings have been largely satisfactory. So I'll maybe just stop there, and Chris and I will be happy to take any questions.
Here we are. Thank you, Michael, for that. What I think I want to do first, is to ask any of our finance team to give a response to the interim findings. I think in particular on the recommendations, first of all on the question of bank reconciliations, which doesn't seem to me to be as contentious, but secondly is as regards the position with an actuary as regards the pension liability. So could I ask either Stuart or Scott to give a response and to the findings overall?
Thank you, Councillor Dawson. If I may just provide some very brief comments in terms of Mr. Wilkie's overall comments, which I thought were very positive and which I would concur entirely with. The experience of COVID-19 in particular, in terms of the impact of preparations, is more acute this year than it was last year, because we've gone through now 12 months of operations in a new environment. In terms of the specific issues identified, bank reconciliations, I wouldn't disagree that those are very important and should be undertaken continuously. Don't know if my colleague Mr. Walker wants to add any more context.
Thanks, Stuart. So I mean, obviously this was a finding that was identified a couple of last year. We took action to put in place checks to make sure they were carried out. Unfortunately, last year there was one that was missed, but you'll see our response on page 11 of the report. The team involved are the team that are processing the thousands of transactions and the millions of pounds going out. So whilst we recognise the reconciliations are important, as Stuart says, we won't be prioritising those over getting the payments out the door. And I think Mr. Wilkie recognised that when he accepted our comment in the management response. Thank you.
I'll only provide a very quick comment in response in terms of a review of pension assumptions. If I may, Councillor Dawson.
Yes, please do.
Mr. Wilkie, as always, is very careful of his language, and I'm appreciative of that. It is a high benchmark that he has set for us in terms of a review of pension assumptions. The pension adjustments in the accounts are an interesting one. They are a very significant item, as Mr. Wilkie has said, in terms of our balance sheet. In terms of our operations, however, because we are required to adjust back to a funding basis, all the adjustments that we put through are reversed out. So in terms of our in-year management of resources, this is not really an area of focus, because we're dealing with it on a cash basis, although the contributions themselves are significant, over £30 million during the course of the year. So it is a significant issue. However, in terms of its impact on our budgeting, less so. In terms of the response, then we have sought to undertake an in-house review of pension assumptions using published information where it's available. I understand that PwC have been commissioned by by Audit Scotland to undertake a review of all the actuarial assumptions across pension funds in Scotland. So that will be useful background information, although I'm not sure that information is in the public domain yet. I'm also not aware of any local authority which actually undertakes or employs an actuary to review independently the actuarial assumptions by its own accredited actuary. So it is a high benchmark. We are happy to engage with our audit colleagues in improving our in-house practice. But as we stand at the moment, it would not strike me as necessarily best value for us to employ an independent actuary to review the actuarial assumptions made by the fund's actuaries of the Tayside pension funds for reasons that I've stated, and I'm not aware of that practice elsewhere, but I absolutely understand why Mr. Wilkie has to make that recommendation within his report.
Thank you, Stuart, and very helpful response. I'm now I have one or two questions myself, but before that, and I fully, by the way, appreciate for instance, on bank reconciliations, what's been stated, and the pressures, the immense pressures that have been on finance staff over the last 15 months, and in the midst of a pandemic, you have to prioritise quite clearly, and appreciate that. The one on the independent actuary, I think that's going to possibly be ongoing, but I hear what you say about PwC. But I'm now going to throw it open to members of the committee. First of all, if you've got any questions, is there anyone?
I've got a question about the...
Yep.
David,
sorry, just on the basis, Stuart, if you can't see the meeting chat, I'll let you know who's asking for a question. It's Councillor Illingworth first.
Thanks, Eric.
Yeah, my question is that given that all our pensions, apart from the teachers' pensions, are managed from Dundee, and effectively we outsource everything out to Dundee City Council, in terms of working out the value of our investments and our risks or our pension strategy, surely these questions should be addressed to Dundee rather than us.
If I can answer, the reason we make this recommendation is because our focus is on the liability within PKC's balance sheet, and that liability, whilst it is based on the information that comes from the actuaries and supported by Dundee, is based on the assumptions which are specific to the council, so specific to PKC, and it's for those charged with governance ultimately to determine what assumptions are appropriate to PKC, and that might be different to the assumptions that would be appropriate to other participating employers. So, for example, around salary inflation, or what the council considers to be future discount rates or RPI or CPI, and so it's those specific assumptions that we are focused on.
Okay, so
yeah, thank you.
Do you have any follow-up on that?
No.
Okay, next question therefore is Councillor Barrett.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Just again on the pensions, I note there's a very substantial change in our pensions liability as a result of the change in assumptions, and I just wondered, KPMG are not relying on this for their audit. So has there been an evaluation of the cost of an actuary, which I know is absolutely not cheap, against the additional costs that be incurred with the auditors in providing more assurance on this? And I do welcome the moves that Stuart described about this being tackled on a national basis. Thank you.
I'm happy to take that, Councillor Barrett. Colleagues in the committee will gather that, and elected members will gather that we have a very constructive and positive dialogue with our external auditors on a whole range of issues. This is one of them. We'll get to valuations perhaps later in the discussion. We haven't gone that far, Councillor Barrett, because as I said, I'm not aware of practice anywhere else where that's been undertaken. It would also perhaps be not a tricky thing to do, but it wouldn't be without a challenge, because obviously you've got issues over access to the source data, which one set of actuaries are using over another set of actuaries. And as an administering authority, Dundee City Council will take responsibility for the appointment of an appropriate actuarial advice. Everybody involved in the estimation is suitably qualified. So we haven't gone down that route. I haven't sought that advice, and I haven't tried to secure an estimate, but as you commented, that would not be inexpensive thing to do, particularly in the first couple of years when whoever we appointed was getting up to speed with actuarial assumptions. The reason I referenced the work being undertaken by Audit Scotland is that I think on the back of some input from KPMG last year, in fairness to our external audit colleagues, there was adjustments across the piece to actuarial assumptions on pensions due to the valuation of assets at the 31st of March. So I think Audit Scotland are aware of the issue and are trying to do something nationally to provide some reassurance on this matter.
Thank you. Councillor Barrett, any follow-up?
No, thank you. That sounds good. Thanks, Stuart.
And next up is Councillor Forbes.
Councillor Forbes.
Thank you, Vice Convener. I want to move on to a different topic, if I may. I'm on page 6 of the report, and it's the middle of the 3 blocks, and it's the review of the cost of services expenditure. I'm just trying to get an understanding. Does this mean that you weren't able to identify if suppliers were paid in time, or you were able to identify that suppliers were not paid on time?
Scott or Stuart?
I think initially that would be a question for our external audit colleagues. Councillor Dawson, perhaps, if Chris or Michael would wish to comment first.
Chris, would you maybe comment on this one, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So our testing normally assumes that the council have a process for reviewing every payment, every invoice over £75,000. Due to the social restrictions that were introduced last March, the council elected not to pursue that control for the period up until the end of June. In order to gain our audit assurance over that period, we tested individual invoices instead to ensure that they had been adequately approved within the council instead. Our audit aims to test the highest level control to get assurance over the processes that exist, and usually that is the review of £75,000 payments within backs runs within the council. And just to gain sufficient assurance for us, we tested the controls beneath it. We didn't identify anything that caused us concern, but as for people being paid on time, it's not something that's within the scope of our audit.
Okay, thank you, Chris.
If I could perhaps a follow-up to Mr. Wicket's response. I think the question from Councillor Forbes was did we or did we not pay people? And we did pay people. The question, the issue brought forward in the report is about the control environment under which we pay people, and the control arrangements we have over those payments.
Okay.
Thank you, Stuart. Thank you, Christopher.
Hopefully that's helpful. Thank you.
Councillor Forbes, any follow-up?
No, thank you.
Okay,
Any
there are no
further
further questions in the chat.
Right, no further questions. Right. Could I just ask one question myself? And it's something I picked up in my email yesterday. There's a publication called Public Finance, and it links in with the Chartered Institute of SIPFA. And they're talking about this international standards that that auditors are going to have to apply more detailed measures on fraud control and anti-fraud measures. Does either of you from KPMG, have you seen anything on that, or am I getting ahead of myself here?
Not that has come through as applicable for this current year audit yet, so no, I'm afraid not. Okay.
Right, and I would just say I'm usually a person on this committee, often in the past has asked questions about pensions. I think what it seems to me would be helpful on this front is that we get more information on Audit Scotland and what PwC is doing. It does seem to me that certainly they have take on an independent actuary is a costly exercise, and the problem is they may come out with different answers and different assumptions from what other local authorities might come out with, and it seems there's a need for consistency across the piece. Right, that's questions. Does anyone have any comments?
Could I just give one further comment, Councillor, actually on the pensions point? So just to be clear, the recommendation we make would enhance the council's control environment, but would likely not change the cost of our audit. So our procedures would be unchanged, and the cost would likely be no different whether you had implemented the control or not.
Okay, but the cost of implementing the control could be quite high. Any comments from members?
Stuart, I have a comment from Councillor Illingworth.
Councillor Illingworth?
Yeah, I'd like to thank everybody who's involved in the interim report. This is, apart from the issue with the pensions liabilities, this is an excellent report, and as usual, what we'd expect from the Finance Department. So very pleased to see such a good report.
Okay, no further comments in the chat.
Okay, I shall just conclude by thanking both Michael and Chris for the report. We're going to be hearing from you again, obviously, come September. But I'm grateful for the work you put in. Also particularly grateful to the work that has been put in by the finance team. And I think that's going to be reflected when we come to item 7. And just going through the annual accounts, just the immense pressures that have been faced by the team over the last 15 months. It seems to me there's nothing particularly, there's obviously a question, the 2 recommendations, that there may be other findings, but at this stage the KPMG have not identified any new significant risks. So thanks to them. I don't know, Michael, Chris, if you're going to be around for item 7, the annual accounts, but for the meantime, many thanks. And I shall hand back to the convener and Eric.
Thank you, Stuart. Thank you for taking that item.
And could I just say, I would just ask the committee formally to note the report.
Agreed. Agreed. Yeah.
Agreed.
Okay.
Out my mouth. Thank you for that, Stuart. And I'd just like to associate myself with your comments of thanks for the work done both by the council's finance team and by our external auditors to get the accounts to this stage under the circumstances that we have all been living in. Okay, so thank you. Moving on therefore to item 5 on the agenda, which is an extremely interesting item. Well, all items in the audit committee are extremely interesting, of course, but this one is particularly interesting to myself. And it's regarding the strategic risk register. And if I can ask the head of legal and governance services, Lisa Simpson, to speak to this report, please.
Thank you, convener. Good morning, councillors. Today before you, you have a report which is outlining the key strategic risks as assessed by officers in relation to the council. I'd like to put some context around the report. It outlines the activity that we've done in terms of risk management over the last year. It highlights the assurance that we are given in terms of the risk management framework. I would like to provide a caveat around the risks that are on the strategic risk register. You will appreciate that risk is fluid and these reflect a moment in time. So at this particular point, they are in no way fixed or static in any way and may change as circumstances change in the future. And we regularly monitor that. I think it's also important for you to understand the way the risk strategy that we have approved in this council operates. And the purpose of the risk strategy is to ensure that those with the greatest influence to mitigate, manage and control risk are the ones who are authorised to do so. So a number of risks which, albeit will be incredibly important, may sit on service risk registers because it's within the service that the control environment is in place. So the risks that are on the strategic risk register that reflect those which either impact on a number of services or impact on the wider community as a whole, or carry significant financial or reputational or legal risk. So I think it's important that you understand that. So if there's a risk that you think would be important but you don't see it on the strategic risk register, that's not to say it's not being addressed. It just means it doesn't fulfil the criteria in terms of requiring to be included on the strategic risk register. We score and assess and evaluate our risks based on the impact of the risk being realised and the probability or likelihood of that coming to fruition. You will see that a number are high level risks and scored in priority 1 status, which means between 20 and 25 on our scoring criteria. Now, a number of these will be on that level, not simply because of the probability or the impact, but perhaps also reflects the ability of the council acting alone to influence that. So, for example, risks which we have a part to play in mitigation, but which of course require wider societal change or require the actions and activity of partner agencies, they would still score relatively high because our sphere of influence and control in mitigating those risks is limited to what we as a council can do. So, for example, in terms of the societal change, you will see that our risk around climate change will remain very high. That is not a reflection on the controls that we have in place. It simply reflects the fact that in order to mitigate the impact of climate change, then what we have to do is involve societal change, which we can only control to a degree. Similarly, in terms of other important and vital areas such as adult and child protection, whilst we are satisfied that our internal control mechanism for responding to children who may be at risk or adults who may be at risk of harm, we also are entirely reliant on the work and support and the controls of our partner agencies such as health, police, etc. So that's another reason why these would score relatively highly. I'm more than happy to take any questions around that. In terms of the actual process for assessing the risk, this has been rigorous. This has been looked at collectively across CMG and EOT. Individual work has been done with service management teams to ensure that risk is sitting at the right level. There is a dedicated cohort of trained risk practitioners within the council who work across all the services and have supported this work. I know that we have Lorna Ferguson here, who has been quite instrumental in pulling together this risk register at the moment, including the wider PP&R group, the Policy Planning and Risk Group. So we're happy to take any questions. But what I would like to do in terms of this particular point is provide assurance that from our rigorous assessment of our risk management framework, we're satisfied that it is adequate. And that was fed into our annual governance statement, which forms part of the annual accounts, and the level of risk in the strategic list reflected on this will also help shape our risk-based audit plan, which we'll see coming up later on in the agenda. So there is a holistic approach here to the management of risk, and the papers before you today collectively give you a comprehensive view of our current assessment of risk within the organisation at this point. Happy to take questions, convener.
Thank you, Lisa. And yes, it's just for the benefit of members, it is absolutely intentional that you'll recall there was a light agenda at the last meeting and a comparatively heavy one at this agenda. This meeting, this is because we wanted to present these key papers together on the same day to give a collective overview of the whole risk framework situation and how it is proposed that this be addressed going forward. So I'm going to put this open to questions. I have a couple myself, but first up was Councillor Illingworth with your question, please.
Yeah, thank you. Page 24 of our pack talks about the performance planning and risk group carrying out PESTEAL and SWOT exercises. Can you tell me what these acronyms mean, please?
Happy to. The PESTEL analysis is looking at the various subcategories of risk such as political, economic, social, technological, legal and environmental. So that's your PESTEL. And in terms of SWOT analysis, that is looking at strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats, standard risk management tools.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any further questions in the chat before I ask mine?
I see.
Convener, I've got then. Happy to let you go first.
Sorry, Councillor Donaldson is all with his hands up, then Councillor Forbes, and then I'll come in. Councillor Donaldson.
Okay. Could I just ask Lisa on this? To what extent there's references made to benchmarking ISO standards, and are we looking to get external accreditation on this? Because I think that does help, and ISO I think does apply to a matter like this. But how do we contrast and compare with other local authorities, and can this risk register be used to compare with other local authorities the risks that they're facing?
Let's try and answer bits of that, and then what I may bring in is Lorna in terms of benchmarking, just to give an indication of what that process was. In terms of ISO, the risk management strategy and the framework that we have adopted as a council is based on that ISO standard, and we have also adapted it around the framework and the approach of the management of risk, which is an ISO, which is in line with ISO standards. So it's about the approach, it's not about getting a particular badge or accreditation for your process. We have developed a process and a framework which is compliant with good risk management practice and ISO standards. So that perhaps addresses that point. In terms of how this would compare with other local authorities, everyone's risks are peculiar to the facts and circumstances of each council, and also within, dependent upon the risk storing would be dependent upon their controls and their assessment of how they could mitigate that. So that may vary. I would be very surprised if on strategic risk registers across the board we don't have public protection, climate change, the impact on the economy, etc., financial risk, etc. So I know from my own experience in other authorities, they would be risks that I would expect to see on a strategic risk register. So we don't have risks that are peculiar, as far as I'm aware, to this council. However, how we manage and mitigate those risks will vary from council to council. I don't know if Lorna Ferguson has anything further to add. She may not, but if she did look at other registers across the piece just to check whether or not we were broadly in line with other local authorities, or whether there was areas where we had significant gaps, and that's all been part and process of our review process. But Lorna can speak to that in detail.
Thanks.
Lorna?
Thank you. Yes, all I would add to that is that in terms of the benchmarking, what we did do was more to kind of inform our own risk register for this year, just to again make sure there were synergies, and again maybe to kind of highlight to people if there was things that we felt maybe we hadn't thought about in that context. But as Lisa says, going forward, our risks will not always look essentially exactly the same as every other risk register, but certainly we will look at it every year and maybe compare and contrast, just to be sure that we're kind of thinking along the same lines. But we did look at about 16 out of the 32 local authority risk registers. We did a bit of analysis around what were the top 10 risks that were on there, and then subcategorised further down. So we have got a degree of assurance that our risks are fairly in line with a lot of the other risk registers, but obviously taken through the PKC slant.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Forbes, I do apologise, I didn't see your cue in the chat there. You were actually first, never mind third. So Councillor Forbes.
That's okay. As the newbie in the room, I've got a few questions about this, but I won't hog the meeting, so I'll come back later. My first one's really dead simple, and it's just my lack of understanding. Is the strategic risk register and the risk register, as they're referred to in the document, exactly the same thing, or are they different?
In the context of this report, it's likely to be the same thing. But what I would clarify is that there will be risk registers at different levels, depending on which level it is controls and manages the risk. So there will be service risk registers, there will be project team risk registers, there will be operational team risk registers depending on the circumstances. But this is the strategic risk register, and the report relates to the strategic risk register.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. If there are no further questions from members, I'll just ask my couple. Lisa, 4.2 on page 25 of our papers. Councillor Forbes, do you have another question? Do you want to come back in just now, or?
I do, Convener, but as I said, I wouldn't hog it, so I'll let others go first. And I notice also Councillor Illingworth has a second question in the chat too. I think we're having chat problems again today.
Yeah, we are indeed. Yes, thank you. Okay, I'll just continue where I was. Sorry. So at 4.2, the final sentence thereof, or a couple of sentences thereof, says, as an organisation, we need to review and increase our appetite for risk. And that was quite a telling word. Increase our appetite for risk. And accordingly, we will be engaging with elected members and officers to further develop our risk appetite statement in the course of 21-22. Can you just comment firstly on the use of the word increase, and secondly on what form the engagement with elected members and officers will be in the months ahead?
Well, first of all, I would like to point out the risk of taking a sentence in isolation and not considering it in context, Councillor Drysdale, because you will see that in terms of the reference to increasing risk, that is if we are serious about looking to change how we work, do things differently, relinquish responsibility and empower communities to take more responsibility for services, how services look and feel themselves, then that obviously will involve increasing our risk appetite in certain areas. There will be some areas whereby we will have a very low, if not no, tolerance for risk. So, you know, illegality in terms of unlawfulness, fraud, all of that sort of thing. You know, you're not going to increase appetites there for things that are that as a council we cannot do because we are obliged to act in accordance with the law, etc. But in terms of looking at the risk appetite that we have to facilitate change and innovation, we may have to flex our financial tolerances. We may need to accept that there is a degree of almost failure that then creates opportunities as we shape and design services going forward. So that's a very difficult thing for an organisation to do and accept. So therefore we would need to explore what our appetites were for that. Similarly, as we embrace technology, there are this may flag up other risks that we have to simply tolerate or accept. So it's about looking at the scenario and the circumstances, but the bit around there about risk appetite is we can't say we accept no risk that's in terms of financial or reputational, or if we actually want to innovate. Innovation and change and redesign and transformation all requires risks to be taken, and that's the area that I'm saying that we need to explore as an organisation, and that's the work that I would be looking to do with elected members going forward to assess what your political appetite is for risk.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate the retort about them not reading the whole paragraph, and I have read it while you've been speaking, so thank you for that. Yeah. The second question relates to the appendices, you know, and it's a relatively general point, but it strikes me, and this isn't a criticism, but it strikes me that the two highest scoring, highest priority risks, i.e. protection of vulnerable children and adults and climate change, that these two are both the risk responses share, and the remainder, the lower priority and the lower scored ones are all reduce. Now, obviously, nobody's expecting that we are, you know, and you've highlighted in your report that it's a collaborative thing, and the council is one party to addressing both of these challenges, and I fully accept that. I just wonder why the word share is used rather than reduce. Obviously, we want to reduce it, we want to eliminate it. So why do we use the word share? And in particular, in relation to climate change, again, looking at the key actions and updates, they're high level, and I just wondered where one can see, or where one might be able to see in the future, a more detailed breakdown of what the proposed key actions and updates might be.
So I'll try and address each of these points for you, convener. So our risk here relates to our impact to reduce. So that is the risk. So that is taken as a given. If it would be perhaps more accurate, or we give you more assurance that our driver is to do our bit to reduce and to help motivate others who have responsibility in reducing the impact of climate change, I am more than happy to make that a share/reduce. That's not an issue at all. There is absolutely no doubt that we have a direct responsibility to do what we are empowered or under a duty to do to reduce the impact of climate change, for example. But we also have a role to play in persuading others and to effecting the cultural change around and in behaviour that is needed to make a significant reduction on the impact of climate change. In terms of where the detailed risks around that, they would be, well, the Climate Board will have a risk register, will be developing its own risk register. There'll be certain risks in terms of targets that may be on the service risk registers that the communities service, housing community service will be dealing with. So they will be at various levels, but because there is a climate change board, there will be high level risks and more detailed risks flowing from the work of that board. And I'm sure there has been elected member engagement from those who are working to develop the climate change board. So therefore there will be ongoing reports and updates and more detailed analysis of the risks that they are managing. And they then feed into the strategic risk register to make sure that the controls and the updates are reflected in that.
Okay, no, thank you. And just coming back on the point you make about happy to change that to share, bleed, reduce. From my perspective, I would like that, because I want it to be up front and centre that Perth and Kinross Council sees itself at the forefront of this effort, and that therefore this may be unfair, but sharing makes it seem as if we're not passing the buck, but it's I think reduce gives more impetus to what we're trying to achieve, and things like low traffic neighbourhoods and all that kind of all these kind of proposed responses.
Absolutely, and we do recognise that we have statutory, responsibilities. We do recognise that the council itself has targets put in place. So there is absolutely no question of, as an organisation, us trying to pass the buck on this. No. And I'm more than happy to look at. There will be a number of those risks that, if we apply the same criteria, I'm assuming the same criteria would apply to the economy and to public protection, etc. Absolutely no question that our job isn't, that we don't see ourselves centrally placed to influence a change on managing and mitigating those risks. So more than happy to make that a share, a bleak reduce in all of these ones. I will review the risk register. That is not a problem at all.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, so we had Councillor Forbes, and then Councillor Forbes, you tell me that Councillor Illingworth has another question that's not appeared in my chat yet, but we also have Councillor Barrett and we have Councillor Donaldson with his hand up. So Councillor Forbes first.
Thanks, convener. As the newbie in the room, I have to say I was absolutely shocked to see the first one of vulnerable children and adults are not adequately protected and so on. And I'm not sure if any members of the media are following this today, but I would have thought that may well be the front page of tomorrow's papers. But Lisa's opening comments did actually reassure me and has made me realise I've actually been reading this slightly incorrectly. So thanks for that, Lisa. Slightly a general question on the individual risks that are identified in Appendix 1. And I was thinking that the solution to most of these, as it is to most things, is more money. The only one that I can see that actually references more money is on page 40, the one obviously that refers to financial settlement. Would it not be reasonable to say that actually if we had more money we could eliminate these risks almost entirely, or at least reduce the risk of them? So should the issue about money not appear in all of those?
Well, I'm going to take your various points. The first thing I would absolutely want to assure this committee and the wider public that we are not suggesting for a minute that vulnerable people and vulnerable children are not protected. I have to make that absolutely clear. Our internal control mechanism for responding to children in need is excellent, and that's been borne out by numerous child protection reviews, inspections, etc. This simply reflects that when things go wrong, the impact is obviously phenomenal, and it requires the input and the vigilance of a whole host of partners, and obviously and the public, and that relationship and working with children and families and adults. So the risk reflection and the risk score reflects the impact of what would happen if things go wrong and the complexity of the adult and child protection framework. But what I would like to give assurance to is that our internal controls and our ability to respond to children in need of protection is not an issue and is not a risk that we are worried about, because our controls are appropriate and have proven to be effective, and inspections have verified that they are. So I would like to just make sure that people are understanding what the strategic risk register is telling them. In terms of the issue,
can I just come back to that, Lisa, just before you move on? And I absolutely, totally agree with you, and your opening comments completely reassured me that was the case. My comment was actually about the presentation. As an elected member relatively new to this particular committee, when you see a sea of red and amber, of course you're immediately drawn to that. But your comments before before we started on this and your subsequent comments have completely put that matter to bed. So thank you for that.
I would also like to say that this is a risk register, so if everything was green, then the controls, etc., would be in place and wouldn't necessarily find themselves on this risk register. This is about risks that we are actively managing because they are moderate or high risk. So that again puts into context what's in the risk register. The issue around finance, if the solution was simply throw money at it, we would probably have resolved some of these really wicked issues, but it's not. If you look at climate change, additional funding, always welcome for always welcome additional resources in terms of looking at what work we could do. But a lot of these are dependent upon factors that are out with our control, cultural change in behaviour. So money isn't always the answer. But I would say, on behalf of every officer in the council, additional resources never go amiss. But I think it's about understanding the complexity of all of the things that go to give rise to a risk. So if you looked at we specifically broken down the risk register to let you see some examples, and these are not exhaustive, but because of there is a risk that which could impact on, and you see there are various different factors that influence or give rise to a potential risk. So it's not as easy as finance is the answer. What we look to do as officers is look at what's involved in trying to mitigate those risks. And if we do see that additional resource or additional capacity would help us better mitigate and manage, we would then put that forward potentially as a budget pressure as part of the budget process. But this is a constant process of review, management, mitigation, control, assessment and analysis.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. Thank you, convener.
Okay, thank you for that. For the minute, I understand that Councillor McDade has been able to join us, so that can be recorded in the minute, please. Welcome, Xander. So we're on paper 5, by the way, strategic risk register, Xander, if you want to pick up. And we're moving on, and I think Councillor Illingworth had a further question. David, do you?
No, I've got no further questions, thank you.
All right, okay. Right, so Councillor Barrett, therefore.
Thank you, convener. I'm looking at page 35, the economic well-being strategic risk. Lisa, this may be a function of the underlying risk registers being rolled up into the strategic risk, but I'm a bit surprised that the only key action that appears is monitoring. Can you confirm that there are more active mitigations in progress underneath that, and things like, I would have expected progress of the economic well-being plan to be fairly key to this?
Absolutely. These would be there will be a risk register attached to the economic wellbeing plan. There will also be certain risks that will be managed at service level in terms of the mitigating factors. This is the very high level strategic risk register which captures. So at this point, our key actions is monitoring how the economic wellbeing plan will be rolled out and implemented. But there will be detailed risk registers, numerous detailed risk registers under a significant number of these key strategic risks. And the registers will be capturing the risks at the various levels in which people have the influence to control and mitigate. So there will be some operational risks that feed into this. There will be some service risks that feed into this. There will be some of the work stream, the recovery work stream risks that will feed into this. There'll be risks associated with specific plans. There'll be risks associated with specific projects, all of which feed into the strategic risk register and the process of escalation and de-escalation that's set out in the approved strategy.
Thanks. It just might be helpful if it had mentioned including business barometer survey and economic wellbeing plan, just to highlight that that's it, because it's as I say, the business barometer survey is the only one that's specified. I think it's a wee bit misleading.
What I would say is that is a particular, because of the significance of this, and we are looking at the wellbeing plan at the moment. The PP&R group are working with David Littlejohn as we speak to flesh out some of that and to make sure that we can present a more coherent policy. It was just, we were very keen that we brought the strategic risk register to this particular meeting so that elected members had a more comprehensive view of the risk position at the moment. But the key actions and the updates will be fleshed out with more specific signposting to where other things will sit. And I think that's a valid point, Councillor, and one that we have recognised.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. If there are no further questions, can I ask? Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon, Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, convener. I just want, it's not so much even for members of this committee, but I think also for the public as well, because I think it's important that they can understand what's involved here. I'm going to give a specific example. It's flooding, and that was a major event in Perth and Kinross last August. It's also been a major event several years ago, twice in 1 year in Comrie with flooding. could I just ask, with flooding, if people look at it and they see it's not here, that will apply in the service level register? And secondly, with both this and the service level registers, these, I want to ask Lisa, these will be fully accessible by the public on the PKC website and otherwise. Yeah.
I don't think that they are that they are entirely accessible at the moment. You will be aware that we are looking to get a system. We're looking to purchase a new system that helps us with our managing, with our performance and risk management and reporting mechanisms. At the moment, this is all done to a degree manually in terms of assessment and spreadsheets and all the rest of it. It is the intention that we're currently going out to the market to get a system for that, which would then allow more detailed and accessible reporting around in terms of ability to drill down if there are particular things, but we don't actually have that technological functionality at the moment. But I think the strategic risk register is something that goes on the public portal. And if it doesn't, it will. Okay, so this register will go on the public portal. The service level registers, we're looking to make that more accessible over coming months. It's about that. It's about that ability to drill down, and I'm not entirely sure what our capability is around that at the moment, or what services currently have. But we can do a bit of assessment of that. But separately, but connected, is the fact that we are looking to get a new system in place, which would perhaps give more clarification and make it more user friendly in terms of accessing the different levels of risk and where they are managed. What I would also do is give assurance that if it doesn't appear on this register, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's not covered on a service risk register. And around a particular point in flooding, I don't know if Fraser Croft's on the call at the moment, but he could probably give you an assurance from his perspective in terms of his involvement in the service management risk register around that, where flooding would probably sit, or where flooding does sit. Fraser, are you available?
Thanks, Lisa. Yes, happy to make a contribution. Yeah, and just picking up on the point, on page 39 and risk number SR07 does make reference in there to severe weather events. Elected members will be aware of the fact that we have well-established procedures for dealing with all severe weather events, including flooding, and indeed we recently undertook an exercise to look at concurrent events, not only dealing with what we would consider to be normal emergencies, but how we would respond also during the pandemic. So those are well established and certainly on the strategic risk register, but also very much within the community's service register as well. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. If there are no further questions, are there any comments? Give it a few seconds to see if any C appears in the chat. Nope, doesn't appear to be any further comments, so thank you for your questions and for your scrutiny of this report. Can we agree to note the report?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, so moving on now to item 6 on the agenda, which is the internal audit strategy and plan for 21-22. Now, we're an hour and 10 minutes into this meeting, and this is the longest time we've ever been without hearing from Jackie Clark. So Jackie, can I ask you to come in and speak to this report, please?
Thank you, convener, certainly. The internal audit plan is provided for you to review today, and I'm requesting that you approve this as the internal audit plan for 2021-22. This report does follow on and is intrinsically linked to other reports on this agenda, particularly the strategic risk report, which has just been considered. There is a requirement under the public sector internal audit standards, which is the relevant standard for internal audit in local authorities, for me as the Chief Audit Executive to prepare a risk-based internal audit plan. And as you can see from the content of this report, it is the proposals are linked very much to the strategic risk register that you've just reviewed. I am conscious throughout the report that, and in terms of audit activity going forward, and I'm mindful of services which continue to respond to the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, but also to the assurances that will be required going forward in terms of the council's ability to achieve their objectives and manage and mitigate risks appropriately. Regarding internal audit resources, I will be undertaking recruitment shortly to cover for retirals and so forth, and also looking to bring in a professional trainee in internal audit as an addition to the team, which will also hopefully assist in future-proofing the service going forward. Looking at the planned activity, there are some aspects on which internal audit is required to undertake, particularly looking there at LEADER and also the facilitation of the National Fraud Initiative, which internal audit oversees the council's response to. The remainder of the resources will be targeted towards the themes identified within the report. And as I said, these are linked specifically to the strategic risks that have been highlighted. We're not in a position to cover all risks within the year, but for those that have been highlighted, I will be working with services to scope out these assignments and agree the appropriate timescales to deliver the report on the assurances to Audit Committee going forward. I'm happy to take any questions or comments on the report.
Okay, thank you, Jackie, and I'll just thank you for the presentation. It's a different format to what we've seen before, and I quite like it personally. But let's see what members have to say, and we have a question from Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Convener. Jackie, just wanted to check, thanks very much for the report, which is very clear. I was just looking at what you said about recruitment between 3.1 and 3.7. You've got 60% of audit time left for planned audit activity. Is that going to be enough, she says, having just come through the risk consideration? Thank you.
The plan that I've put forward takes account of what the resources are anticipated to be during the year, and we should certainly be able to achieve that plan, assuming that recruitment goes according to plan and we're able to recruit first time to the posts that are planned. 60% takes account of training, which obviously with a professional trainee there will be additional requirements for training and mentoring and support, which has been factored into that, along with other such activity, which whilst I'm planning for it, it does take away from the resources that I can dedicate to the specific individual assignments. Included within that is of course internal audits follow-up arrangements, where we follow up on agreed actions to ensure that the actions have been taken, that have been agreed, and also that they are effective in managing the control risks that were identified at the time of the audit. So there's lots of other things which I would take into account, which are not part of the 60%.
Thank you.
Okay, Liz. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Jackie. And yeah, I mean, I've in all my time involved with audit, I've been concerned about the size of the team and its vulnerability to unexpected events, and I think for such a small team you do a fantastic job, so thanks for that. But I'm glad that we're at least trying to increase the team, and hope we're successful in that, and that would be very beneficial going forward. So are there any other questions to Jackie? Or any are there any comments? Okay, if there are no questions or comments, we have a comment from Councillor Illingworth.
Yeah, this is a good report, as you'd expect from internal audit, and as the convener said, this is a much better format and helps us understand the issues much better. So thank you for that.
Thanks, David. Okay, so can we agree to approve the strategy and plan for 21-22?
Approved.
Agreed.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, and I'm now going to pass back to Councillor Donaldson to take the next item on the agenda. Stuart.
Thank you, convener. Eric, can I also just concur with your earlier comments and Councillor Illingworth's comments about the pressures, the stresses that have been placed on the internal audit team? I very much hope, I know that you're looking for somebody on IT, that you're fully back at full strength as soon as possible. Right, we now move to item 7 on the agenda, the unaudited draft annual accounts for 2021. This also includes the annual governance statement, which I believe has already gone through the scrutiny committee. Could I ask, and as before, just with my chat function, could I ask Eric for you to act as kind of go-between between me and any questions and any questions and any comments? But first of all, could I ask the head of finance to give a report on the accounts?
Thank you, Vice Convener. The unaudited accounts required to be considered by those charged with governance at a meeting to be held no later than the 31st of August. Consideration of the draft accounts by the committee today meets this requirement. And as Vice Convener said, the annual governance statement for 2021, pages 68 to 73 of the agenda pack, at pages 15 to 20 of the accounts, was previously considered and approved by the Scrutiny Committee on the 9th of June. Following approval of the unaudited accounts, they will be signed and submitted to Audit Scotland and the Council's external auditor, KPMG. As set out in section 3 of the report, the unaudited accounts will be made available for public inspection between the 1st and the 21st of July inclusive, with the audit of the accounts expected to take place in July and August. It is anticipated that the unsigned audited accounts for 2021 and KPMG's draft report on the audit will be submitted to the committee at its meeting on the 20th of September and Council thereafter. I would, however, add the caveat that current circumstances may impact upon these dates. On the matter of dates, I would offer my apologies for the error in the covering report in paragraph 3.3. Council is, of course, on the 6th, not the 7th of October, and I would add my thanks to the committee member who gently highlighted this. Since the report was issued, there have also been a few minor presentational changes to the management commentary and note 7 on reserves. The financial performance of the Council in 2021 is reflected within the unaudited statements, as summarised in the management commentary on pages 54 to 67 of the agenda pack. There are significant differences between the presentation of information in the accounts under proper accounting practice and the basis used to monitor and project revenue and capital expenditure throughout the year. The comprehensive income and expenditure statement on page 78 of the agenda pack shows the net cost of council services in 2021 as approximately £368.9 million. Included within this figure are £53.8 million of accounting adjustments for capital, pensions and other items. This brings the net cost of service delivery to £315.1 million on an equivalent basis to that presented within the Council's monitoring reports. The main variances on revenue expenditure are summarised in the management commentary in the table on page 60 and detailed in pages 60 to 61 of the agenda pack. As I advised members at last week's council meeting, all Scottish local authorities are holding higher balances at the end of financial year 2021 due to the amount and timing of receipt of Scottish Government COVID funding. This is by far the largest contributing factor to the positive variance of approximately £25.2 million shown in the table on page 60. In addition to grant funding, there was staff slippage in education and children's services and £2 million of an underspend on property costs, reflecting the closure of buildings during the pandemic. There were also planned reductions in expenditure approved as part of the Council's reserve strategy in March. While general fund and housing revenue account balances increased to £75.5 million at the year end, commitments against these reserves total £3 million for the housing revenue account and £64.3 million from the general fund, including the earmarked reserve for COVID-19 previously approved by Council in January. Subject to audit, the uncommitted balance in general fund reserves at the 31st of March 2021 is therefore £8.2 million or 2% of the net 21-22 revenue budget, as approved in setting the reserve strategy. Members will, however, be aware that uncommitted reserves provide the Council with financial resilience, including the ability to manage unpredictable expenditure, such as the cost of responding to severe weather events, and we've had some commentary on that earlier today. Given the significant additional income received late in March and the outturn of the unaudited accounts, it would be prudent to review the Council's reserves position later in the financial year, and any proposals will be brought back to members for approval. Total gross expenditure on capital in 2021 was £57.7 million, comprising £19.8 million of expenditure on the housing revenue account and £37.9 million on the general fund programme. As previously reported to Council, the pandemic and the suspension of construction works earlier last year significantly impacted upon the delivery of the Council's capital programme in 2021, with overall capital expenditure being approximately £20 million less than in 2019-20. The balance sheet on page 79 of the agenda pack shows the resources of the Council and how these are financed, reflecting the Council's overall financial position at a point in time. Subject to audit, the Council's net assets in the balance sheet have increased by £93.4 million to approximately £651 million as at the 31st of March 2021. The audited financial statements for 2021 include the group accounts, which incorporate the Council's interests in Culture, Perfect and Ross, Live Active Leisure, Horse Arts, Tayside Contracts, Tayside Valuation Joint Board and Perfect and Ross Integration Joint Board. There are also statements from the Council's charitable trusts and common good funds. I will conclude by offering my thanks to colleagues across the Council for their support in the preparation of the unaudited accounts in these challenging circumstances, and to my colleagues Alison O'Brien and Scott Walker, who led the accounts preparation exercise. Both colleagues now are happy to take some questions. Vice Convener.
Thank you, Stuart. Right, and
so we don't have any questions at the moment, Stuart. If I may just express my thanks on behalf of the committee, as ever, for the considerable work and effort that has gone into the preparation of these accounts in such difficult circumstances, and whilst that extraordinary effort was not unexpected, because that's always as it is from the finance team, Nevertheless, thank you for your extraordinary efforts in 2021 in this regard, so thanks. We now do have a question from Councillor Illingworth.
Councillor Illingworth.
Great, thank you, Vice Convener. This is the 5th time I've read the unaudited accounts, and it still bemuses me a little bit even now. So I've got some questions to ask, or one question to ask about reserves on page 143 of 174. It talks about usable reserves, unusable reserves, group reserves, and charitable and common good reserves. Now the figures there are huge, but I imagine that we can't actually use them to pay teachers or whatever. Can you talk us through the 4 different definitions, please, and what they can be used for?
Stuart.
Thank you, Vice Convener. I'm actually going to open this up to colleagues, but just as a general point, and this will probably preface what my colleagues are going to say, we essentially have 2 types of reserves. We have cash-backed reserves, real money, if you like, and we have what are effectively accounting reserves, which are used to reverse some of the accounting adjustments, most notably the pensions adjustment in the accounts back to a cash basis. But if Scott or Alison are able to take you through the specifics.
Okay, thanks, Stuart. If I could take you to note 32, which is on page. Sorry, I've got papers out of order.
118.
So my papers are out of order. Basically, on note 32, it sets out a list of the unusable reserves, and they're really accounting reserves. It's where we do the pension adjustments that we talked about earlier on. It's where we do revaluation reserves. It's where we do capital adjustments. And the important thing about these reserves is that they are not cash backed. So you're absolutely right. They cannot be used to fund council activity. They're a means of processing some of the accounting transactions. It's actually only the usable reserves that the council has access to. And again, they're set out in the movement in reserves statement, which is at the start of the accounts. So that's the general fund, the housing revenue account, the insurance fund, etc. The ones that actually have cash backing them. And just to go on, Councillor Illingworth, you picked up on the group balance sheet, okay? So that's the balance sheet that incorporates our ALIOs, so Live Active Leisure, Horsecross, our share of TASA contracts, our share of Perth and Ross Education Joint Board, etc. So that's the third part of that line, the group reserves, that's their share. So it's really just a presentational thing, that's our share of their reserves. So again, the council can't really access those. And finally, the charitable common good funds, you know, that's within the domain of Perth and Ross Charities and the 10 common good funds that we operate, of one of which you'll be a member of. So I hope that answers your question.
Yep, thank you very much. That's much clearer now.
Councillor, I think you may have more than one question.
No, I've only got one question, thank you.
Only one. Are there any other questions?
There are no further questions in the chat at the moment.
Okay, that being so, I have a couple of questions.
Okay, so we now do have Councillor Barrett.
Right, Councillor Barrett.
It's okay. If you want to go ahead first, Stuart, that's fine.
No, on you go, Liz.
Okay.
I'll let you go.
Okay.
You may even ask my question.
Thank you. I just have just a few. Page 19 on. I'm going by the numbering in the unaudited accounts, so that would be. It's note 9.1. Just wanted to check whether there's been any change to the Chief Internal Auditor's opinion since last year's accounts, because I don't have them. That's on page 72 of 158, clause 9.1.
Stuart or Scott or?
I think that's a question for my colleague Jackie Clark.
Jackie.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. There has been no substantive change to the opinion over the recent years. that reasonable reliance can be played on the arrangements.
Thank you. It was just the use. I just wanted to check the word reasonable was still the same. Thank you.
Absolutely, yes. Reasonable is good.
Yes, that's fine. Thanks. I notice on in note 14, which is on page 47 of 158. No, that can't be right. 47 of the accounts. 100 of 158. There's a very significant reduction in the government grants and contributions in total expenditure, in income down at the bottom of that page. I just wanted to check whether that significant reduction in funding from the government, are you expecting that to continue and what the impact will be?
Thank you. Can I start that answer, and then I'll possibly hand over to my colleague Alison O'Brien. First of all, Councillor Barrett, thank you for the heads up on this question. It allowed us to look into this issue. I am pleased to tell it's a presentational issue. Basically, we've allocated something to a different line than we did last year. And Alison, do you maybe want to pick? So apologies to the committee for that, and thank you for picking that up. And Alison, do you want to explain the actual detail? Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Councillor. Yeah, we had a little look at this this morning, and last year we included 22.8 million of housing benefit subsidy in that line. This year, unfortunately, we've forgotten to do that, and we will amend that today, and the equivalent figure would be 21.6 million. So that would increase the total for government grants to 49.6 million, which would therefore show an increase, and the increase is around 5 million, which is actually to do with the early learning and childcare expansion of 1140 hours and the additional funding we've got from the Scottish Government for that.
Thanks, Alison. That makes a lot more sense, because I was wondering about that in the context of the other things in the accounts. So thank you very much for that clarification. And just talking about funding, the note on page, sorry, bear with me while I give you the full page numbering. Page 120 of 158 at the bottom. The Council has received a number of grants, contributions and donations that have yet to be recognised. We're waiting to have confirmation whether the funding can be distributed by the Council in 2021-22 to provide further pandemic support. Do you have any indication of when we're likely to get that confirmation? That's at the bottom of note 34.
I'll pick up on that, Councillor Barrett, if I may. Vice Convener, yep. Thank you.
Thank you.
And first, I compliment Councillor Barrett for diligence. And it's, I hope our external auditors are still on the call so we can see that their level of scrutiny being exercised by the committee. So
thank you very much. That's very much appreciated, Stuart, after the hours.
Absolutely, I would confess it's not an easy read. We've had significant COVID funding. I think that comes back to my opening remarks, Councillor Barrett. But we've also had timing issues about when the money comes in and when the money goes out. One of the most significant sets of transactions was in March around business grants. So we had money paid out in April, which kind of crosses the financial year. So we've got anticipation of money coming in to pay for expenditure we've incurred, but that's just unwinding itself through the piece. In terms of the significant payments that went out in April, the Scottish Government colleagues actually recognised the cash flow implications of that and provided reassurance and provided the money in advance of the council making business support payments. And as recently as yesterday, we received another £515,000, or we didn't receive the money, but we received confirmation of another £515,000 of Scottish Government support for business grants. So it's going to be an ongoing process. I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, that's good. I'm glad they've recognised the impact of that, because it was obviously causing difficulty earlier on, or more difficult to manage. Thank you.
Thank you. No further questions.
Right, I have two. First of all, I'm not actually this time going to ask about pensions. The finance team might be surprised at that. I want to ask about public-private partnerships, PFI, and that's set out on page 67. What I want to ask, first of all, on that is the arrangements we have on the contract that expires in September 2025, and that's only basically 4 years from now. What the arrangements are when that contract is terminated, what is the position, are there termination payments, so on, so forth. But the other one I wanted to ask is on page 113, and in the second paragraph there on PFI, you refer to a material uncertainty on valuations, and that's quite important. The words material uncertainty do spring out, and it states that a material uncertainty is where the degree of uncertainty in a valuation falls outside any parameters that might normally be expected and accepted. So on these 2 points, could I ask officers in finance to respond?
Thank you, Vice Convener. So I'll take the first question, and colleagues perhaps can comment on the issue of evaluations. An issue of PPE, property, plant and equipment valuations is a general issue across all local authorities, depending on the methodology applied. I'll use that as an opening comment. In terms of the specifics around the Poor House contract, Poor House contract was what you might think of as a first generation public finance initiative contract. The methodology and the contractual terms were subject to change and iteration over a piece. The contract comes to a conclusion in 2025, as you rightly say. The asset returns, because it's effectively leased, the asset returns to the owners. So the council therefore has effectively 3 choices. We can cease occupation of Poor House. It's one choice. Yep. We can negotiate the purchase of Poor House. That's another choice. We could renegotiate a lease of Poor House for a set period. That's the third choice. And that ties into some broader work which colleagues also in the call are undertaking around about the future of service delivery. And I know that Council was minded to provide some financial support for that work at Council meeting last week, which is very welcome in progressing that. But there is a decision to be made at Poor House in the near future.
Thank you on that part of my question. And obviously this is going to tie into later on what we do as regards the investment blueprint, because it's quite a major item. And we haven't really talked about that today. The second one is this reference to a material uncertainty, and that seems to me to strikes me with concern.
Colleagues, Scott Allison.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. So you're absolutely right. Valuation is a hot topic in the audit world. You'll have noticed earlier on that was through the interim audit report, interim external audit report. It will be through their final report to members in September. We are working closely with our colleagues in property around this. We're doing our own internal reviews, because what KPMG will be looking for us to do is to have satisfied ourselves that we've done everything we can to make sure that the balance sheet represents the most up-to-date information. KPMG have got their own central team who will be helping us with this and scrutinising us. So you're absolutely right. It's a hot topic, and as Michael said actually earlier on, it's probably just the start of this, and this will go on for a little while as valuations go up and down.
Yeah. Right. So the uncertainty is going to continue for some time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there are other questions in the chat, Scott, Stuart. Although Scott, you had an answer. Was that just to that question?
Yeah. Thanks, Kevin. I just wanted to come back in terms of Councillor Barrett's obviously finding that issue on one of the notes. I just want to make the committee aware there are other couple of presentational changes that we plan to make for the final version. So we want to include an extra bit in the management commentary about our treatment of grants. That's just in line with best practice. It doesn't change any of the statements. It just gives the user of the accounts a bit more information. And we've spotted a few typos as well ourselves that we just want to tidy up. So we just want to make you aware that we will be providing a slightly different version. We'll go to KPMG for audit. That's the version that Stuart will sign this afternoon, and that's the one that will be audited. But nothing material, nothing that changes the actual core financial statements.
Okay.
No further questions.
I have one further question, and it's really following on from the question that you asked yourself, Councillor Drysdale, at full council the other day. It's on page 124. It's about lender option, borrower option borrowings of 44.4 million. But it concludes by stating these have a call date in the next 12 months. Can I ask what that means, and is there any implications on that? The reference to a call date.
I don't know if colleagues wish to comment. We undertook to provide a briefing note for Councillor Drysdale on this issue, and I think we can maybe perhaps address that. Councillor Dawson, I'm not sure if anybody on the call who could necessarily provide you with a precise definition of that. Apologies for that, unless colleagues are able to provide more information. I think that's one, perhaps, that my colleague John Jennings could perhaps provide you with a...
If I may,
sorry.
Yeah, if I may. So, and thanks for raising that again, Stuart, in terms of this meeting. So, maybe it's presumptuous of me, but it sounds like there may be an upcoming opportunity to address this issue. And for those who don't recall the specific issue that was raised by myself at full council, these are long-term financial arrangements which date back more than 10 years as far as I can see, and we are currently paying 4.59% interest on these, whereas the PWLB interest rate typically, or average PWLB interest rate just now is 2.59%. So we're paying 2% over the odds for this. And my question last week was to establish whether there is an opportunity to refinance these in the foreseeable future, and it sounds like there might be from this that you've picked up, Stuart, but perhaps we can get that clarified afterwards.
Councillor Drysdale, I can just maybe clarify some of the language. When we took out the lender option, borrower option, the LOBOs as they're known, the interest rate was actually lower than PWLB rates. And as I commented at council, everything is at a point in time and everything is in comparison. And what we have is the lowest set of interest rates, probably. I wouldn't want to put a time period on it, but I would very much like if we've seen anything like this in generations, not just in years, but in generations. So I think it's about a comparison to, although the rates look high in comparison to our PWLB lending, if you were to look at the situation 3, 4, 5 years ago, it would have looked very different. So I think it's just context is really, really important. The other thing about these arrangements is they are contractual arrangements, so there's a degree of negotiation. We're happy to come back with detail to you on that.
Yeah, I think that would be, thank you, Stuart. And it's quite a technical area, but you know, the sums involved are fairly large. But that briefing paper, I think, may very well be useful. Thank you. Right, from all I can ascertain, that is exhausted. Any questions? Are there any comments from members of the committee? Eric, the convener, can you help me out again here? Is there anyone else?
I will do. Councillor Barrett.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you. I would just like Hello, following on from Eric's comments earlier, I'd just like to add my sincerest thanks to Stuart, Alison, Scott and the finance teams, and to all the heads of service and their finance teams for the huge amount of work in preparing the draft annual accounts. It's such a hugely complex document and I found it very well presented and informative. And I do commend the management commentary for its summary of the challenges faced by PKC in the last year and the way that they've been tackled right across the council, because that comes shining through in the accounts, boring documents as they may appear to lots of people. We can see that there are further substantial challenges ahead for us and a great deal of uncertainty. And I feel that the continued sound financial management that we can expect from our team will be fundamental to our ability to meet these. I just want to say thank you. We are very grateful to you all for your unstinting commitment, your competence and your professionalism. Thank you.
Thanks.
No further comments at the moment.
Okay. Then I'm going to move to, I just want to add, first of all, other comments that have been made, and that is very much to thank the finance team. And after what's been an immensely challenging year, I think the accounts just reflect the hard work that's been put in. I think the KPMG interim report is, apart from a couple of points, really is, very complimentary of what they have done. I think the other thing about the annual report and accounts is something I think people often forget. It's quite a good reference point for if you're looking at other areas of the council. Some of the narrative is actually quite useful if you're looking at specific points. I think they also reflect the immense amount of work, not just put in by finance, but by other council employees and by the voluntary sector over the last 15 months. So I just say well done, really very pleasing. I'm now going to move to us. We don't note this time. It's to approve the unaudited annual accounts, inclusive of the annual governance statement. Do we have agreement that these accounts are approved?
If I may just clarify that we are required to authorise the head of finance to sign these.
Yes, and to authorise.
Yeah.
Yeah, and not just approve these unaudited accounts, but to approve that the head of finance is indeed authorised to sign, and will be signing if we approve this afternoon. Do we have agreement?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Agreed. Subject to these small changes that were highlighted by Mr. McKenzie and Mr. Walker.
And I think the small things on present, just small items on presentational things, but there's nothing going to be of any change of substance. Okay, we've thank you, committee members. We've approved and authorised the head of finance to sign the accounts, and we will move to the next stage in the process, and then we move to the final audited set of accounts in September. I'm now going to move on. I'm going to hand back to the convener.
Thank you.
Then
thank you, Stuart.
Going to go into private session.
Thank you, Stuart.
Thank you.
Thanks for dealing with these two items. Much appreciated. So that concludes the public meeting for this morning. And as Councillor Donaldson has just indicated, we intend to now move into private session for a further report. So with the committee's approval and forbearance, therefore I will close this meeting now and ask everyone to rejoin on the separate link for the private meeting. The time is currently 10:52, so can we start that meeting at 11 AM if that's in order? Okay, thank you very much. The public meeting is now closed.